Millionaire's twins cried every night until she appeared and changed everything. Sometimes the fiercest battles aren't fought with fists or firepower, but in the quiet collapse of a father realizing he's losing his children, not to distance, but to grief. Ethan Walker never imagined that a man could build an entire ranch from nothing and still be helpless inside his own home. In Montana, a land wild and rich with promise, he was respected, once a trusted veterinary doctor, now owner of one of the largest spreads in the region. Yet all his cattle, land, and savings couldn't bring back his wife. Nor could they fill the growing emptiness inside his twin boys, Sam and Jamie. His wife, Evelyn, had died 2 years earlier during a mountain fever outbreak. The baby they were expecting was lost first, and days later, Evelyn herself slipped away. Ethan lost both his wife and unborn child almost in one breath. Sam and Jamie, just 6 at the time, only understood that Mama had gone. And if Mama could leave, anyone could. From that moment on, their house was no longer a home. Laughter vanished. The twins, once bright and tender, turned unruly, guarded, and heartbreakingly clever at pushing people away. 7 caretakers came and left. Some left in tears, others in silence, after only a few days. Pranks became armor, snakes under blankets, mud in pitchers, disappearing for hours just to see if anyone would come looking. Only Mrs. Halley, the longtime housekeeper who had swaddled the boys as newborns, stayed. Even she, with her iron will and soft heart, was growing weary. And Ethan? After long days of herding cattle and fixing fences, he'd sit alone in the sewing room Evelyn once loved, staring into the flickering lamplight, haunted by everything that might have been. He'd built the ranch house with his own hands, every beam and stone a dream forged alongside Evelyn. Her presence lingered in every corner, the blue curtains she'd sewn for the kitchen, the flower garden now overtaken by weeds, the rocking chair where she'd sung lullabies to their sons. That silence, the gaping void she left, frightened Ethan more than winter or wolves. The boys didn't need supervision. They needed someone patient enough to stay, gentle enough to understand their fears, and strong enough not to flee at the first test. But after what he'd witnessed over the last 6 months, Ethan no longer dared to hope. That kind of person didn't come around. Not anymore. Until Wednesday evening, when the sun dipped behind the valley and bathed the hills in gold. A stagecoach rolled up the drive and stopped at the Walker Ranch gate. A woman stepped down, tall and slender, carrying a modest bag, and a calm in her eyes like someone who'd survived more storms than she cared to name. Ethan didn't know it yet, but everything was about to change. Nora Bennett didn't carry much as she stepped down from the stagecoach, just a worn canvas bag and shoes dulled by long travel. The Montana wind swept past her, lifting red dust that clung to the hem of her gray skirt. But her eyes held no uncertainty, only stillness, the kind carved by deep loss. Ethan stood on the porch, hands still dirty from fixing the horse pen. He watched the woman approach, her steps steady, unfazed by the harshness of the land. She handed him a letter, an introduction from an old friend in Boise. Nothing grand, just a simple note. She's not easily rattled. Ethan frowned. He'd heard that before, 7 times to be exact. Sam and Jamie will try to drive you off, Ethan said plainly after brief greetings. They're good at it. Then I'll try to give them a reason to let me stay, Nora answered, calm and direct. There was something in her eyes, not confidence, but experience. This wasn't her first encounter with hurting children. The agreement was for 1 week, same as before. If she lasted, they'd talk. If not, well, no one would be surprised. That evening, everything seemed ordinary, at least to Ethan. He sat at the head of the table, the twins silent, eyes narrowed at the newcomer. Nora sat across, ladling soup with quiet composure. Mrs. Halley watched the scene and sighed softly. Then it began. Sam stood, pretending to fetch water. Jamie tugged lightly on Ethan's sleeve, creating a distraction. Then, "Ah!" Nora jumped back from her chair as a slick little frog leaped from the folded napkin on her lap. Ethan nearly spilled his drink. The twins stifled laughter, their first in weeks. But Nora didn't get angry. She simply tilted her head, watching the frog hop across the floor, and said, "Well, it seems I haven't given you a name yet." The three adults froze. Nora knelt, gently scooped up the frog, and petted its back. "I think Sir Hops-a-Lot suits you just fine." Sam bit his lip, trying not to smile. Jamie stared at the woman who'd named their prank. No scolding, no storming off, no fear. After dinner, Nora helped Mrs. Hallie with the dishes. Ethan stood outside, watching lamplight flicker across her determined eyes. That line from the letter echoed in his head. "She's not easily rattled." Now he believed it. Night fell. The wind howled over the rooftop like voices of the past. In her small bedroom, Nora placed her bag on the floor and pulled out an old photograph, her late husband and little girl. She touched the frame gently, smiling like greeting old friends. "Not bad for a first day," she whispered. "Tomorrow will be better." At the Walker Ranch, dawn came early. Before the roosters crowed, before sunlight broke through the mist, there were quiet stirrings in the soil, wet grass, cold wind, and the hush of a world waiting to wake. For Ethan, those were the moments of peace, before he had to step back into a house that felt emptier each day. But since Nora arrived, something had begun to shift. Not loudly, not quickly. Just a steady ripple, like water, finding its way back through dry earth. On the fourth morning, Ethan was hammering shut the back sheep pen when he heard something unfamiliar from the kitchen window. Laughter. Not loud, not forced. Just soft, warm, unmistakably real. He stopped. He turned toward the sound and walked slowly to the window. Inside, Nora stood at the sink, sleeves rolled up, scrubbing a baking pan. Jamie handed her a towel, his face relaxed, the usual guarded look absent. Sam sat nearby, scribbling something on the chalkboard Nora had set up just yesterday. Ethan couldn't hear their words, but then Nora flicked water at Jamie, making him squeal. Sam laughed. Then all three burst into laughter together, unthinking, unafraid. Ethan stood frozen, something in his chest cracking open and melting quietly. Nora didn't try to be their mother. She simply stayed, patient, present. She knew children like Sam and Jamie didn't need a manager. They needed someone to believe in. She didn't command. She invited. "What sound does a hungry chicken make?" she asked Sam before gently guiding him outside. "If you were a thirsty plant," she said to Jamie, "would this cup be enough?" There were no right answers, only feelings, and feelings led the way. Within days, Nora pinned a small board to the porch that read, "Today's hero is..." Sam's name appeared first, written in bright green chalk with a little chick beside it. He said nothing. But the next morning, Ethan found him outside at sunrise, feeding the hens. Jamie watched quietly for days. Then, one morning, Ethan spotted him awkwardly combing his hair in front of the mirror. No one had asked him to. Ethan started noticing everything. The boys no longer locked their bedroom doors. Their boots were lined up neatly, something Evelyn had tried to teach for years without success. Then came a turning point. Ethan was reading in the study one evening when he heard water running in the bathroom. He stepped into the hallway and paused. Warm light poured from the open bathroom door. Inside, Sam and Jamie stood at the sink, brushing their teeth side by side, laughing with foam on their lips. No reminders. No orders. Ethan turned away quickly, his eyes stinging. Nora didn't change the boys with grand speeches. She used presence, steadiness. She gave them space to choose trust. When Sam broke the water jug, she didn't scold. She knelt beside him, helped him pick up the shards, and said, "You can't learn to hold things without dropping them first." When Jamie misspelled his mother's name, she didn't correct him. She placed a hand on his shoulder and whispered, "You miss her, don't you?" He nodded. She said nothing more, just stayed. One afternoon, Ethan passed the old tool shed Nora had turned into a classroom. Inside, her voice drifted out, telling a story about birds who always returned home, no matter how far they flew. "Because that's where their hearts never truly left," she said. Ethan placed a hand on the wooden frame. He didn't know why the words struck him so deeply, but they did. That evening, the kitchen smelled of sugar and flour. Sam and Jamie helped Nora bake cookies. Sam dusted Jamie with flour. Jamie knocked over the egg bowl. Nora just laughed. Ethan walked in, meaning to pass through, but Jamie spotted him. "Want to try our first batch?" the boy asked. No teasing, just a real offer. Ethan looked at Nora. She nodded. "I'd love to," Ethan said, sitting beside them. For the first time in 2 years, all four sat around the table, sharing, smiling, whole. Later that night, Ethan stood alone on the porch. Wind swept through the grasslands, carrying the scent of wildflowers and damp earth. Above, the moon hung full and bright. In his hands was an old tablecloth Evelyn had once embroidered. He traced the threads, silent. He wasn't ready to speak it. But he knew. Something had come back. Not Evelyn, not the past, but life. The weeks that followed moved like a quiet melody. Day by day, Ethan felt his home coming back to life, not just through laughter, but through the steady rhythm of normalcy. Nora didn't replace Evelyn. She never tried. But somehow, she stirred in the three of them, something they thought had been lost forever. Safety. Ethan slept better. Dinners were filled with conversation. Walks around the ranch became more frequent. Life wasn't perfect, but it was warmer than it had been in years. And sometimes, just when we begin to breathe again, the storm has already crept across the horizon. One crisp afternoon, as Nora taught the boys how to bake using the old wood-fired oven, a lone rider appeared at the ranch gate. Sunlight glinted off his black suit, and in his hand was a thick envelope sealed in red wax. Ethan stepped outside, a strange chill settling in his chest. The wind shifted. This time it didn't carry the scent of wildflowers. It carried something heavier, something wrong. Edwin Blackwell never knocked. His arrival was like an unexpected cold wind in spring, sharp, unwelcome, and impossible to ignore. That afternoon, Nora was outside with Sam and Jamie, teaching them how to bake bread using the old wood oven behind the house. From the front gate came the unmistakable rhythm of hooves on dirt. Ethan stepped onto the porch and saw him. Blackwell in a stiff black suit, boots still dusted from travel, holding a thick envelope sealed with red wax. "Good afternoon, Ethan," he called, smiling without warmth. "I think we need to talk." Inside the envelope was a notice of debt collection, a loan Ethan had signed 2 years earlier during Evelyn's final illness, when the cost of medicine and doctors had piled up faster than hope. Blackwell had been the only one willing to help. The loan had been for $1,200, but with interest, penalties, and mysterious addendums Ethan had never read carefully, the total now approached $3,000. And Blackwell wanted it, all of it, within 60 days. If not, the deed to the ranch, the land, the livestock, the home would legally become his. Ethan stared at the final line. His chest tightened. The land he and Evelyn had built with sweat and sacrifice now hung by a thread, one he'd unknowingly knotted himself. "I'm just following the law, Ethan," Blackwell said with a shrug. "Nothing personal, but you know, with the railroad expanding through this region, property values are rising. If you're not looking to hold on to it," he smiled, "I'd be happy to take it off your hands." Ethan clenched the letter so tightly his knuckles turned white. Blackwell rode off, but the chill he left behind lingered in the air. Nora found Ethan in the horse stall later that evening. Wind rustled the straw, and the last light of the day barely touched the strain on his face. Without a word, he handed her the letter. She read it slowly, carefully, her brows furrowed. "Something isn't right," she murmured. "This part, additional asset clause. Did you actually agree to this?" Ethan shook his head. "I signed it while Evelyn was unconscious. She'd had seizures all night. Jamie had a fever. I didn't read it. I just signed." Nora nodded solemnly. "Blackwell knew you were desperate." "I didn't have anything but desperation," Ethan said, his voice rough. She placed a hand over his. "We'll figure it out." That night, after the boys had gone to bed, Nora quietly went through the drawer in Ethan's study, where old documents were tucked away. She found a faded copy of the original contract. Ethan's signature was shaky, almost illegible, clearly written under duress. But more concerning was the seal on Blackwell's copy. It was a red square, unlike the standard round seal used by most legal offices and courts. Her eyes narrowed. She carefully photographed each page. Tomorrow, she'd ride into town. "Thank you for staying," Ethan said softly from the doorway. Nora looked back at him. "I don't stay for the easy things. I stay for what matters." The next morning, rain came unexpectedly. It tapped against the tin roof, slipping through cracks in the old shingles, soaking into wood that remembered too many seasons gone by. Ethan sat alone in the study, staring out at the land beyond the window, where Evelyn once planted a patch of purple flowers. Now it was nothing but weeds. But he couldn't bring himself to step outside. It wasn't the rain that held him back. It was the storm within. At the same time, Nora quietly gathered documents, preparing for her trip into town. She didn't say much, but every time her eyes met Ethan's, they carried the same silent message. "You're not alone." And while the threat still hovered like a dark cloud over the ranch, the only thing holding them steady was the trust quietly forming between them in the cracks left behind by loss. Nights at the ranch were quiet, so quiet one could hear wind slipping between wooden planks, an owl calling in the woods, or the gentle breath of those deep in sleep. But that night, Jamie was wide awake. He couldn't say why. Maybe it was the scent of rain still lingering, or maybe it was the strange flutter in his chest after watching Nora laugh, really laugh, for the first time when Sam told one of his terrible jokes. Jamie slipped out of bed for a drink of water, but as he passed the parlor, he paused. A soft yellow glow spilled from the door's edge. Inside, Nora sat alone in a chair, holding a small photo frame, and crying. Not loud, not messy, just quiet, steady tears, as if she didn't want to bother the silence. Jamie hesitated, then walked in slowly and sat beside her. Nora startled, quickly wiping her face. "Jamie, why are you awake?" He didn't answer right away. He just pointed to the frame. "Who is she?" Nora handed it to him, a girl, maybe 4, with blonde curls and bright eyes, smiling wide among wildflowers. "Her name was Emma," Nora said softly. "My daughter." Jamie didn't say anything at first. He looked at the picture. Then he whispered, "Our mom died too. We didn't get to say goodbye." Nora nodded, eyes glistening. "Emma had a fever. It happened too fast. I couldn't hold on to her." They sat there, bathed in lamplight, sharing a silence that needed no words. Something changed after that. Sam, who always looked for mischief, started following Nora to the chicken coop, without being told. Jamie let her check his spelling without a fuss. They didn't call her Mama, but when she sneezed after getting caught in the rain, Jamie ran to get her a towel. Sam left her a piece of apple pie on her desk with a note. Not too salty this time. An unspoken apology for an old prank. For the first time since Evelyn died, the boys no longer looked at grown-ups as people who might leave. Ethan noticed everything. Ethan hadn't meant to eavesdrop. He simply couldn't sleep, as usual, so he headed to the kitchen to make some tea. But from the hallway, he heard Jamie's voice, soft and uncertain, and then Nora's, tender as velvet, but cracked with memory. He froze, one hand on the doorknob. A sliver of lamplight spilled across the wooden floor from the parlor. Every word Nora said about Emma, about the helplessness of watching her daughter slip away, cut into Ethan's chest like a familiar blade. He'd cried, yes, when Evelyn died, but never aloud, never fully. His grief had lived in silence, buried beneath long days of hard labor and sleepless nights beside lukewarm cups of tea. But now, in this quiet house, he heard his pain spoken, in another woman's voice. After their conversation ended, Ethan didn't make tea. He just sat at the kitchen table, one hand to his brow, heavy with thought. Minutes later, Nora entered. She didn't ask why he was awake. She simply poured water into the kettle and placed it on the stove. "I wasn't planning to tell them," she said quietly, eyes fixed on the flame. "But Jamie, he just sat beside me, didn't speak, and I realized sometimes a child's silence is the most honest invitation." Ethan nodded. "I heard, not on purpose, but I heard." Nora didn't flinch. She took the seat across from him, her hands resting gently on the table. For a while, they said nothing, just the kettle boiling and firewood cracking. "You're the first to talk to Jamie," Ethan said. "Really talk about his mother. No sugarcoating, no pretending." "Because I know what it's like," Nora replied, "to lose a piece of yourself without saying goodbye." Ethan looked up. His eyes held something fragile, like a long-shut door cracking open. "Evelyn used to sit right here, late at night," he said. "She'd embroider tablecloths, hum softly. Every time I remember it, I feel like I'll fall apart." "You won't," Nora said gently. "You just haven't let anyone see the pieces." In that moment, the oil lamp flickered, casting soft shadows on their faces. Two people, two quiet wounds, seeing each other without judgment. "Thank you for staying," Ethan whispered. Nora smiled, and this time it wasn't forced. "Thank you for letting me." The next morning the sky was crisp and blue, as if no storm had ever passed. But inside Ethan, the unease lingered, not grief this time, but a very real fear for what lay ahead. Nora packed the documents in her old cloth satchel, tied her scarf, and buttoned her coat. Before leaving, she paused at the door. "I need to go into town. There's someone I need to see." Ethan wanted to stop her, not because he doubted her, but because he didn't want her to face it all alone. But he nodded. If anyone could face Blackwell head-on, it was Nora. Hannah Monroe, the town's record keeper, was the first person Nora sought out. A widow in her 50s, Hannah lived behind the old courthouse, surrounded by towers of boxes filled with maps, land deeds, and records dating back 4 decades. "Blackwell?" Hannah frowned. "Rumor is he's been buying land near the new railroad expansion. Seems like he knows exactly where it's going." Nora handed her Ethan's contract copy, pointing to the strange red square seal. Hannah peered over her glasses, eyes narrowing. "This isn't from any local court. It's from a private entity, Red Valley Holdings." "Who are they?" Nora asked. "No one local knows. But here, let me show you something." Hannah unrolled a large map of the area, pinning it to the desk. "Look, every property Blackwell's bought lines up with the projected railroad path. If Ethan loses his ranch, Blackwell will control most of the west side." Nora's stomach sank. This wasn't just about debt. Blackwell wasn't collecting. He was conquering. Without hesitation, Nora penned an urgent letter attaching the contract copy, photos of the unusual seal, and Hannah's annotated map. She sent it to the Montana State Department of Justice and also forwarded a copy to the regional federal representative. She wrote, "If this continues, we won't just lose one ranch, we'll lose a community, piece by piece, to greed and deception." Before she left, Hannah squeezed her hand. "You're the first person to stand up to him. Don't stop now." That evening, as the sun dipped low, Nora returned to find Ethan chopping wood behind the barn. She placed the folder on the bench beside him. Ethan skimmed through the pages, his face darkening. "What did you do, Nora?" he asked, half concerned, half afraid. "If Blackwell finds out, this could get dangerous." Nora didn't flinch. She looked him straight in the eye. "You think I don't know that? But if we bow our heads, we lose everything." He shook his head, voice lower. "You don't owe this place anything. You're not from here. You can still leave before this gets worse." She stepped closer, her eyes steady, glowing in the amber light. "No," she said. "I left once, left places filled with nothing but pain. But this time, I'm choosing to stay. Because, Ethan, you and the boys, this is my family now, and I don't walk away from family." The words hit him like a wave, silencing every last thread of doubt. He said nothing, only looked at her, for a long, long time. And for the first time, he saw not just courage in Nora's eyes, but love. Not the easy kind, not the fleeting kind, the kind that stays. That night, Ethan stood by the old fence for a long time. Nora's words echoed in his mind, not as a promise, but as something deeper. She chose to stay, because this was her family now, and for that, Ethan knew he couldn't back down. The next morning, just after sunrise, the rumble of hooves and wagon wheels echoed down the main road toward the Walker Ranch. A procession approached, raising clouds of dust. At the front rode Edwin Blackwell, upright in a black coach, followed by two armed men, badges of a private enforcement agency gleaming on their vests. He held a document in hand, a court-ordered seizure notice. Ethan stepped onto the porch, shoulders square. Nora stood beside him, her hand resting lightly on his arm, not to hold him back, but to remind him, "You're not alone." Blackwell climbed down, all calm smirks and legal arrogance. "I'm right on time. You don't have the money, do you? Then it's time to leave. Peacefully." "This is my land," Ethan said, "and I'm not leaving." Blackwell shrugged. "Then we'll take it, by law." But before he could signal his men, a loud voice rang out. "Not so fast, Blackwell." Everyone turned. Down the road came Sheriff Adams on horseback, leading nearly 20 townsfolk, farmers, bakers, teachers, all carrying tools, lanterns, even hand-painted signs that read, "We protect our own." "This order has been suspended pending investigation," Adams declared. "We have evidence of contract fraud and insider manipulation." Blackwell laughed. "Based on what? The word of a nanny?" Nora stepped forward. "Not just my word." She held up a sealed envelope. "This is a letter from Harrington Railroad. It confirms that Red Valley Holdings, the company buying land, is tied directly to Edwin Blackwell. Same signature, same bank accounts." Hannah Monroe, just arriving, unfurled a large map showing how Blackwell's purchases all lined up with the upcoming railway route. Land grabbed using insider knowledge. Adams took the documents, scanned them, then nodded to his deputies. "Cuff him." Blackwell resisted. "You have no authority. I'm a shareholder. No one has the right to cheat and steal from a town," Adams replied. "You're under arrest for document fraud, insider theft, and threatening citizens." As the handcuffs clicked into place, the ranch exploded with cheers. Neighbors rushed forward to hug Ethan, to thank Nora. One elderly woman teared up. "You did what none of us dared for years, dear." Ethan turned to Nora, surrounded by smiling faces, and saw not just courage in her eyes, but something else, something he had unknowingly waited for a very long time. That night, after everyone had gone, Ethan and Nora sat together on the porch steps. Sam and Jamie slept soundly inside, curled up like nothing had ever been wrong. Today, Ethan said quietly, was scarier than any winter I've ever lived through. But it was the day people chose each other, Nora replied. And that's what makes this a home. Ethan was silent, then gently placed his hand over hers. Thank you for staying. Nora smiled, resting her head on his shoulder. Above them, a single shooting star streaked across the sky. And maybe no one made a wish, because everything they needed was already right here. After Blackwell's arrest, life in town slowly returned to its usual rhythm. But at the Walker Ranch, nothing was the same. Not because the land was saved, but because hearts had begun to heal. The silence that once filled the house had been replaced by laughter, by voices calling each other across the fields, and the warm scent of baked bread drifting through every window. One early spring afternoon, under a sky brushed with soft clouds, Ethan called Nora out to the field behind the house. In his hand was a small wooden box, crafted from pine, cut from the tree where Evelyn once planted her garden. I know nothing can replace what we've lost, Ethan began, voice steady, but what you've taught me is that sometimes loss isn't the end. It's where something new begins. Nora looked at him, silent, eyes already glistening. He opened the box. Inside was a simple silver ring engraved with a wildflower, like the ones growing near the little schoolhouse where she first taught Sam and Jamie. I can't promise perfection, he said, but I can promise you'll never be alone again. Nora covered her mouth, tears falling freely. I don't need perfect, she whispered. I just need to be loved, truly. Ethan knelt, bathed in golden light. Please, be part of this family, forever. Nora nodded, no hesitation, no need for words. The wedding took place a week later, simple, joyful, and filled with laughter. It wasn't in a church or a town hall, but in the open meadow behind the house, where Evelyn once planted lavender, now covered in spring wildflowers. The entire town came. Some brought chairs, others built an arch from willow branches, and someone strummed a mandolin version of the first song Ethan and Nora ever listened to together. Nora wore a modest cream dress, handmade by Hannah Monroe. Sam stood proudly as best man, and Jamie carried the rings. But what made the day unforgettable was what came just before the vows. The boys stood before Nora, eyes wide and voices clear. We love you, Mama Nora. She sank to her knees, arms around them both, her heart full to bursting. For the first time, and forever, she wasn't an outsider. She was theirs. She was home. That wedding had passed like a soft dream, one the town still spoke of every spring. For Ethan and Nora, each sunrise after that day felt lighter, each evening softer. It wasn't an ending. It was the true beginning of something lasting. Seasons changed, the laughter remained. Days folded into months, and love became less about grand moments and more about quiet routines, shared glances, and hands reaching for one another without needing to ask. 2 years later. The field behind the house had grown, now home to more horses, more rows of corn. The roof had been repaired, the kitchen rebuilt, but the laughter in the living room remained the most precious thing of all. Nora was expecting her first child with Ethan. She moved slower now, but her eyes were brighter than ever, because now she knew she truly belonged here. One warm May afternoon, as she rocked on the front porch with a book in hand, a letter arrived from the east. The seal bore the crest of Belford Academy, where she once taught. The letter announced that the school's new library would be named in her honor, the Nora Harrington Memorial Library, to recognize her quiet, lasting contributions to education and community. Ethan placed a hand on her shoulder as she read the final line. "Do you want to go back?" Nora looked out across the fields, where Sam chased Jamie through tall grass, and their little home stood waiting in the sunlight. She smiled, shaking her head gently. "Home isn't where you find it," she whispered. "It's where you build it, together." And for a woman who once lost everything, who once lived in silence, she now had all she'd ever need: a family, a field, a roof over her head, and a future growing inside her each day. And maybe the fiercest battles aren't won with weapons, but with the courage to stay, to love again, and to believe that broken hearts can still become whole.